How's it going, everyone? Just going ahead and working on adding Andy right now, as well as Joe.
Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. Pretty good. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Not too bad. This will be interesting. It's the first time I've done an IG Live, but I think we got everything rolling, so should be good. Got a pen and paper, write down questions that people have as we go through this. And I've got my test one here too, so if there's questions about that people might have about whatever related to the app, I should be able to hopefully pull it up and showcase.
Nice. Cool. So we're just waiting on Rentmeester?
Yeah, I'll double check here on the screen to see if I need to do anything else.
You been out hunting much besides North Dakota?
Locally, yeah, a couple times. I went in hunting in Minnesota, a local cattail marsh, and it's been hot and kind of muggy. I've been able to find some fresh sign. The white oaks are really not dropping a whole lot, but we did find a couple that were hammering the ground pretty hard.
Really?
And, oddly, we'd even find those like one trees that were just like every couple seconds, like 5 squirrels in the tree, like it's all right there. I even found a fresh grape at one of them I was hunting, and I've not been seeing movement. And even like you'll walk all the way back to the truck 3/4 of a mile across the marsh, you don't hear anything blowing, you're not kicking anything up. It's just been slow to kick it off, which is kind of odd. But just kind of continuing to go after it, either after work or on weekends.
Yeah, there's like, man, I have been searching high and low for white oaks that are carrying, and there's just so few here this year. I don't know what it is. I found like 2 or 3 little areas that are holding, and even in those, it's just like even in those, it's just a couple of trees here and there. But I was scouting a few days ago, and I covered a ton of ground and just looked over hundreds of white oaks, and not a single one was holding. It's crazy. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know enough about them to know why. Why some years it'll be like that, just one extreme to the other. But that'd be good to know. But what I do know is that there's been years like this in the past, and when I can find ones that are holding, that usually translates into a pretty good early season. So I've been marking those, and I'm gonna key in on those. Hopefully there's a good buck in the area. That's when I've been able to key in early season, when there's like a bumper crop of white oaks or white oak acorns. Like I really struggle early, and in through the beginning of kind of mid October. But then the years like that, I usually have better rut hunts, because like they haven't been able to clean them all up, and I can kind of follow the sign to the areas that are still, dropping or they haven't cleaned them up yet. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, it should be good. So I think it's just a matter of finding a day where they're going to be moving and just staying active and staying on it.
Yep.
Now, one question I have for you, and just for the folks watching it, I think we should be able to get Joe on hopefully pretty soon. I know I've seen his request come through and I've accepted it, but for some reason it's still not going through. So we'll continue to work on that in the background. But I guess one question I had for you is, in those acorn type scenarios, how quickly do you see things change? And if you see droppings in an area that has oaks, and maybe it's like it is this year, where there's not a lot of oaks, and you scout 3-4 places, there's just not a lot of acorns. You see sign, it's maybe from 2 days ago, but it's not like today. It's not this morning. Are you continuing to look until you find that just absolute fresh sign, or are you oftentimes putting sits in areas that are the best that you maybe found for that day?
Yeah, that's a hard one for me to answer, because it's quite often where, I know I need to be out there and scouting the fresh sign, and I just can't get out, due to my schedule. So usually what I guess my process normally would be is to try to locate an area that's holding the type of buck that I want to pursue first, and I have a pretty good knowledge of a lot of the areas I hunt. I'm always tackling new ground too, but a lot of the areas that I've hunted in the past, like I kind of know where the oaks are. So I'll go in and check them. And then if there's a buck that, I've been able to glass, get a picture of, cut a track, locate in that area, then that's when I'll key in on it. But if I don't find that first, I don't pay it a whole lot of attention, especially around here, because on a normal year, there'll be tons of areas that have acorns, but not necessarily a buck that I want to kill, So I usually,
Right.
I think I usually, sometimes the oak, especially on a year like this, will point me in the direction of a good buck, because it's a very isolated pocket. And I've seen it in the deer marsh and swamp too, like on an oak island. It'll really draw in, if there's a good deer or bucks in the area, it'll really draw them in. But I would say more times than not, I'm finding a buck in the area through sightings, observation, glassing, a picture or something. And then I relate back to the knowledge of where the food sources are, and then I can usually, not always, but usually kind of get in on them somehow.
And do you find that they're usually hyper pocketed this time of year? Like, do you find that the buck you're looking after, like, he's going to be within that window regardless of what the food's looking like?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think they really, I hunt quite a bit of farm ground. I would say that's between marsh and river bottom and swampland and farm ground, I would say that's kind of like what I deal with most around home. Like, we don't have a ton of like hill country. And the food sources are always changing between crop rotation and acorn production and apple trees that have them this year and next year they don't. I think, it can be, a buck could be there one year and then the next year he's just not there, and I think he's gotten killed, and then the next year after that he's back. So he could be,
yeah.
It's really a lot of fragmented land around here too. So sometimes I think he could be just, a couple parcels over, or, on the other side of this piece of public or whatever. But it's, yeah, I think if things remain the same or consistent or somewhat consistent, yeah, I find them in the same general areas. Like, if they were there early season the year before, I'll find them there again. But, that slight food source shift, if you're not really keying in on that can really throw you off. They might be in the area, like in the general neighborhood, but it might not be in that same, 50 acres or 100 acres.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, even like the stuff we were scouting this weekend, it was like, it's kind of opposite from what you have. It's not really fragmented land. It's really big land.
Mm-hmm.
And you go out there and you scout it, and it's like, there's sign, but you keep bouncing island, spot check, and you go playing A, B, C, D, kind of work down the line. It's like, there's deer sign in here. There's somewhere in that area. And it's almost like a numbers game. You hunt it enough time to give it enough sits, and you check enough spots, and eventually you're going to run into success.
Yep. I see Joe just texted. This won't kick me off if I look at it, right?
It shouldn't. Yeah, he's had a number of invites come through, and I've invited him a number of times, and I just keep getting error codes, and we try to add him to the live. Maybe if you try clicking the little button at the bottom to add a person and see if you can try joining or inviting him to join, maybe that'll work.
I don't know if I have that button because I didn't.
Okay. Good job as the host. But yeah, for some reason we're having trouble getting Joe to join. Yeah, I just clicked on it again. He had an invite. I clicked accept. Oh, maybe he's coming on now. We got something. You there, Joe? Look at your camera. There he is.
Awesome.
Hey, Joe.
We got it figured out.
Hey, guys. What did I miss? Anything good?
Not
We were
really.
just talking about early season planning and updates and all that kind of stuff.
Cool. Sounds good.
Yeah. How's your been going? Started up.
Good. I've been in the game with a few deer. It's been hot, but I don't think that's quite an excuse. But getting the hang of it, bumping some deer around, nothing major, I guess.
Yeah. cool. I'm jealous. I'm envious of those states that are open. My Ohio season starts Saturday. So see what happens.
In your Ohio is open. You kind of cut out a little bit there. You said Ohio you're going to be going to?
Yeah, Ohio. Like I live in the bottom part of Michigan, so I'm very close to like northern and northwestern Ohio. So that's kind of like in my home range there. Oh, looks like Joe's frozen.
Yeah, hopefully we can get him back pretty soon. Also, just kind of a general note for anybody watching. Comments, if you see comments come through, they're hard for us to keep track of because it's just like, flying by at the bottom of the screen. But there should also be a specific question module that you can click on with Instagram Live. And if you use that, then we should be able to more easily see and read the questions to be able to answer them.
Yeah. So I'll try to keep an eye on some questions, but as far as like Spartan Forge goes, it's got a ton of features, right? Like that's why we love it. It's got a ton of stuff that we've always used in one place. So I'm just curious, like what are some of your favorite features, or what do you find yourself using the most?
For me, it's a combination of the Intel tab and the mapping tab. I know you're a big journaling guy. I'm sure you'll get into that too. But I mean, there's not a day that goes by that I don't do some sort of e-scouting. And then from a weather standpoint and a planning standpoint, I mean, I have some level of flexibility with my job to where if I have oftentimes a couple of days in advance that I know the weather's going to line up, or there's a good prediction, or I got a wind direction I want to hunt a certain area, then I can somewhat plan the next couple of days ahead to where I can maybe get out of work early, or maybe it's a weekend or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing what the weather and the wind are going to be before that happens allows me to really kind of micromanage that any given week. And even when it comes to, like, let's say late pre-rut, late October, and maybe I have 5 days of PTO planned. Well, as it gets closer, maybe I can see that the weather's going to be garbage for 2 of those days. And so I could just, cancel my PTO for those couple of days and then go ahead and take off 2 days on the back end of that and just kind of shift those things around. And so having the weather and the prediction there is really helpful for me from that aspect. And the mapping just continues to get better and better. I mean, we've been working with that from the beginning. All the features that we've, really wanted to have, they're one by one starting to get implemented. I don't know if you guys have been seeing some of the little stories we've been posting about, like the 3D mapping, the 10-foot contours and that sort of thing that we're testing in the background, but it's, it's really starting to come along.
Yeah, that 3D mapping is so cool. I've been testing that out on the web version, and that'll be coming to everybody soon, but really cool, especially if you hunt, obviously in the hills or in the mountains out west. I was scouting I was kind of cyber scouting some of the areas that I've mule deer hunted in the past, and really cool. Again, just another consolidation, another feature consolidating into one spot, one app, where before I would go to like Google Earth, and then I'd go to Onyx, and then I'd go to the Weather Channel to see the weather forecast, and then I would go to some sort of prediction app. I'm just like everybody else, man. I used to love those little deer apps, not necessarily to tell me when to hunt, but I used them just to kind of observe and see if I thought they worked. Like a lot of them, I was especially drawn to the ones that kind of correlated with like moon data. So, but now like with this and, with the movement prediction of actual GPS collared deer, that's super cool. And also I kind of use that more in like more of just kind of, I look at it and then I kind of observe and see what correlates. And, I've definitely seen, like on those full range days, I've seen good movement. I mean, there's no doubt about that. For me personally, I still go with my gut a lot as far as like where to set up. I don't really let it dictate that too much, but been pretty surprised at like how accurate that is. The journaling, everybody knows I'm a big journaler. I've written a story for every kill that I've had since I started hunting, and then I've journaled every single hunt since my very first year of hunting. And that's cool. It's in 2 different notebooks, and now that's right there on the app too. So, weather forecasts, historical weather data, the journaling feature, 3D mapping, the UAV imagery, which is like so cool. It's really awesome as far as like, especially in like swamp and marshland. I mean, you can literally see deer trails. Just really handy, for that kind of habitat. But it's just, that's the thing for me, is just having everything in one place instead of me, you know how an iPhone you can like cluster like certain apps. I'd have like a hunting little page and everything. It has like the weather channel and this and this and this, and now it's just like everything's right there on Spartan Forge. I don't have to like rifle through all those different apps. So that's what I like about it the most.
Yeah, that's a great point. And for me too, like a lot of those things that I used to be able to use, like I could maybe get the information, but maybe it was only available on my laptop or computer, and I could only use it for just sitting at home and looking at stuff. I could never use it in the field. And now just having a one-stop shop has definitely made that a lot easier.
Yeah.
Here's for people interested too. I don't know how easy this would be to see or not, but that's kind of what's coming on the app side of things. 10-foot contours, public-private land. So it's just continuing to get better. We do have a couple of questions that came in, Andy. One is, and maybe I'll let you take this one first. Do you prioritize wind or thermals more for areas with a lot of elevation change?
I will prioritize wind more as far as like where I'm going to set up, especially if it's a decent mile per hour. Like if it's like light and variable, I would focus more on thermals. But if it's like a decent consistent wind direction, that's going to tell me kind of maybe what side of like a ridge to set up on, or what direction, what end of a edge of a bedding area to set up on. But then I would always look at the hourly forecast, and I see how that wind is going to change throughout the evening, die down. Focus it on I would say both, but type speed more on.
So we got to go back on.
Yeah. Some feedback.
I'm gonna try. Might be a reception issue. I'm gonna try a different location here.
Okay. Yeah, we noticed it seemed like when you jump on, there's a little bit more static, a little bit more feedback.
Okay.
Yeah, I think my answer to that question, Andy, and let me know if you get any feedback too when I'm talking. Mine's very similar to you. And if it's light and variable, then obviously thermals take more of an effect. And if it's a strong wind, then wind, gets more of a play in that equation.
Yep.
For how I'd be looking at what to do.
Yeah, so if it's strong enough, like into the evening hours, like if it's day like 15 and above, I won't pay attention to thermal play. A typical day, there comes a point where you got to really focus more on the thermals there, and really set up more for that. I think that's what gets a lot of hunters, and it gets me like a lot too to this day, because sometimes you set up in a spot where you know where you need to be and the wind is good, and then the wind dies down in the evening. Well, your thermals are going to go to the lower spot in the field or the lower spot down the hill, and it's hard to, a lot of times there's deer bedded down there, in these little spots where things tend to pool, and it just makes it really tricky. And I get busted every year with setups like that I trying to beat, and they bed in those spots for a reason. There's a spot that I really like. It's a an overgrown field, like a set aside field. And it's got, chest high weeds all through it. And there's some clumps in there, some lone trees and some little islands, and bucks will sometimes bed in that structure. But there's this real low spot in that field. And because it's low, a lot of the rolling hills around it, a lot of the moisture and everything kind of drains down there. So the vegetation is higher and greener and thicker there anyway. But there's always a good buck bedded in there. And it's also on the predominantly downwind side of that field, but all the thermals in the evening just all dump down to that one spot. And it's just like, it's such a good spot. And you can only hunt it when you have a strong enough wind to overcome the thermals. If you get like a strong west wind, you can get right up tight to that buck. And now you can't get usually on the direction where he's going to head, but you can get real tight to that bedding area. And sometimes you can catch them coming in the morning too. So it's a really cool spot. And it took me a long time to really kind of understand and figure that out. The thermal thing for me was, a pretty big learning curve. You kind of know the concept, but then so many things can affect that, the wind direction and how much foliage is there. And then the temperature change, you can have sometimes you think you should have a big, strong rise thermal by 9 o'clock, but if it's overcast and the temperature is not really climbing, you don't really get that big shoot up of high rising thermal. So all things like that, where you kind of, you read the hunting textbook and it should do this. There's a lot of factors that come into play that make things happen a little differently than you think.
Yeah, that reminds me too. I was scouting in North Dakota on the tail end of the September hunt I did this year, and I kicked a buck out of a marsh that was, I was probably 20 yards away from him by the time I finally bumped him. And I tried to analyze it. I'm like, I feel like I'm missing something. I feel like it's too easy. There's no reason he should have been bedding here with this wind. And the thing I come back to is there either had to be, some kind of a swirl effect with where he was at in the marsh, or some kind of a thermal effect that I haven't figured out yet. It seemed like he was just sitting there based on, totally sound-based bedding, but he couldn't see anything because the grass was too tall. It didn't seem like he had a wind advantage. So I'm, anticipating there's probably something else influencing his factor to bed in that particular location, and maybe it was thermals.
Mm-hmm. Bill messaged that there's going to be an update tonight and tomorrow for Spartan Forge, so be on the lookout for that. One guy asked if he was wondering if a doe's shoulder is stronger than a buck's shoulder of the same age. So like a 5-year-old doe versus a 5-year-old buck, due to the fact that the buck spends a lot of his growth is on antler development. So, I'm just going to take an educated guess on that, and I would say no. I've killed some really old does, and they're always much smaller, in bone and stature and everything, than a buck of the same age, for sure. Yeah, that would be my guess on that. So
I tend to agree. You take you quarter out a big buck that you shoot, and then do the same thing with a doe, and you lay them down side by side on the cooler, and it's like, just mass wise, there's a big difference in what's going on there.
Yeah, and I've killed really old does that weigh 135 pounds, and then I've killed 3, 4, 5-year-old bucks that are 200 pounds, 195 pounds, 220 pounds, so it's a whole different, it's kind of like just a man and a woman, the bone density, everything is a whole different thing.
Yeah. We got another couple of questions, also kind of along the same line from Spartan Forge. One's asking about historical weather data and whether or not Spartan Forge has it. Answer to that, short answer is yes. And the other question is how to use the historical wind data in Spartan Forge. So I'll pull up while I'm talking here the Intel tab, which kind of showcases what that historical wind would look like. But effectively, what you're able to do is look at a wind rose that gives you common wind directions in a certain location, and be able to look even month by month to see what the most common wind directions are of that month and like what the wind speed is. You know, is it common to have strong northwest winds or common to have mild southeast winds or some kind of a mix? And having trouble pulling up on this phone. I think it's probably just due to the fact that it's on a test account, so they don't update the some of the Intel tab as frequently. But I also have it shown on my YouTube channel, and basically it's allowing me to, primarily from an e-scouting standpoint, figure out, especially in areas where I think there's access concerns, or if there's areas where there's a really strong wind-based movement, likely, like say if it's hill country or river bottom or something. Those are the two areas where I'll look at it from an e-scouting perspective to try and narrow it down to, you know, what's the 20% of the area that I want to spend 80% of my time focusing on when I actually put boots on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, that historical wind data is really cool. I've been asking Bill, and he says it's coming. That's the one thing on Spartan Forge that isn't there that I use quite often, and that's like the individual day historical weather data. I still have to go to Weather Underground for that, but I've talked to Bill about that, and you know, that's going to be coming eventually too. So just like the other day, you know, I had some pictures. I pulled a card, and I had some pictures of some deer coming out into the field, and I wanted to know what the wind direction was, trying to anticipate like a setup there. And so I had to go to Weather Underground and look up that specific day at that specific time to see what the wind was doing. So once that gets on there, I think that's going to be huge. I use that a lot. I don't know if a lot of guys do, but I find that very valuable, especially when you're going through old photos and you're trying to, you know, you might be trying to nail down a pattern of a certain deer or a certain general area. You know, deer kind of move through this area, and you're trying to put together a pattern like, oh, okay, you know, they're coming through here mostly on like a northwest wind or something like that. So that's super valuable information, you know, if you can really pay attention to it.
Yeah, I guess I do that a little bit. Maybe I do it slightly different from how you're looking to see it done, but on the journaling tab, if I put in a specific place, like let's say if it's a trail camera location, then a time and a date that the photo is taken, it'll go ahead and pre-populate the, you know, temperature, wind direction, wind speed, humidity, dew point, visibility, and pressure, barometric pressure for that given location and time.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's, you know, slightly different from what you're getting from Weather Underground, or if it's kind of similar, but at least that's how I tend to get that daily information from a historical past date.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Here's a question here. With a 15-degree temperature drop, what kind of area would you try to hunt in the morning right now? That's kind of a difficult question to answer, you know, because you could think of a million different scenarios there. I'm not a huge morning guy in the early season. For me to make a morning move in the early season, I would even say the whole beginning half of October, I need to witness something. I need to observe it. I need to have some sort of visual glassing of a buck actually moving and not already in his bedding area. You know, traveling through an area, maybe a trail cam picture. Something would have to give me a really strong clue that I can get to a spot in the morning and cut him off. Now, there are states that I've hunted early where that's certainly possible, especially like more in the Western Plains, and there's been some spots out east that I've hunted that the particular area I was hunted was more like rolling hills and like open ground. And I could spot, you know, a buck on his feet working through like a drainage or something, you know, towards his bedding area. And then it's like, okay, I saw him, he's on his feet in daylight. I got time to get to this spot, you know, in the morning, and he's going to be working his way through eventually. So it really depends. It's a tough question for me to answer, but I would say 95% of the time, I'm more of an evening guy in the early season. But with that 15-degree drop, I love that. You know, I think that gives you a great opportunity, like a spike in movement. Might get you some early movement in the evening. Certainly could give you some later movement in the morning too, but I think you're approach needs to be much more dialed in. Like if I'm going to take a stab at a morning hunt, I want to know exactly where I need to be. I don't want to go in and guess. I don't want to go and just sit and hope that I'm in the right spot and hope that he's going to come through here, or hope he's not going to get downwind. I want to know, have a pretty confident, nailed down approach for me to do that, because it is a risky, it's a risky hunt going in the dark, because you don't know what you're going to bump on the way in and on the way out, or on the way in, I guess. And then on the way out, if you don't have a clean exit, you could be educating deer on the way out. So I love the 15-degree drop, and especially in the early season. I think that's going to, there'll definitely be some deer hitting the ground, but I would say most of them are going to be in the evening.
Yeah. I'm way more evening hunt than morning. So I'm definitely the same boat as you. It's got to have a lot of details to pull off a successful morning hunt. Unless I'm going after just like filling a tag. Then, sitting on an oak flat or something like that with a strong temperature drop, or like on the edge of it between like a bigger oak flat and bedding, if you're just trying to kill a doe or something like that, has been pretty effective for me.
That's a good point, because my brain is always thinking about like a mature deer, and there's a lot of people out there that are maybe just trying to kill a deer, maybe their first buck, or just trying to fill the freezer early. If that's the case, then yeah, especially if you got a scenario where, the bed to feed pattern is stretched out a little bit. Yeah. And you got some room to kind of work in there. You could certainly kill one, in the morning, but a lot of the spots, that are in more broken up country, farm ground, it's like the food's there and then the bedding is here, and there's not a lot of big time travel in between, and it's real risky kind of getting in. It's like you either got to slip in the back door of the bedding area and wait for them to come in, which is a solid approach, but then you got to get out. You got to get out without, them detecting you. So, and then if you're trying to like access through like the feeding area and trying to get in between, like in the dark, you're probably going to blow some deer out. So it's just a tricky deal. And that's why I want to have kind of like a real solid, confident plan before I try to pull off a morning hunt in the early season. Yeah.
Backpedaling a little bit, I do have an example just to show people on the IG Live of what that historical weather windrows looks like. So maybe a little bit blown out there with the highlights, but you can tell this would be like for the month of October in a specific location, what the common wind directions would look like, and then you can use that accordingly, and it would look different for November, different from September. Like I tend to notice that at least around me, a lot of the areas have a lot more predominantly southern and southeastern winds in like September, and then in October you get kind of that mix where it's kind of shifting from September to November. In November you get a lot more of this defined northwest, switching between southeast, and you get that tug of war between the warm fronts and cold fronts.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was a couple of questions related to the web app. One was regarding pins and getting pins in from other apps. If I'm not mistaken, those are going to be pretty closely tied together. The desktop version is where I've seen and be able to start utilizing the pin drop feature. It's still in development, but I do think that's, I'd say, on the near horizon. I don't want to give any specific dates because I work in product development, even outside of this, and trying to get specific dates is always hard. But it is soon, and Andy and I, like you've seen on the stories, have both been testing it amongst other people, and really excited for that to finally drop.
I got a question here. This is a good one. Best advice for effectively scouting hill country for early season, week before the opener here in Central PA. So again, that's kind of a loaded question. You go a million ways with it. So I'm gonna suppose if this person's asking this, he hasn't had a chance to do much scouting up until this point. So it's kind of like a last minute scout for an early season hunt, which I don't love to be in that position where I don't have some previous history, some previous knowledge of the area, some knowledge of like where, typically where the bucks like to bed, in a certain bridge system. But if I was like going in blind, you know, if I had a few days before the hunt, man, that's tough. You know, you're going to have to, if that's the case, and I don't have like any cameras or anything to go off of, you're going to have to strictly go off sign. And that's my favorite way to hunt. You know, with all this increase in like, you know, trail camera technology and stuff. And I love trail cameras, but my favorite way to hunt is like when I go out of state and I don't even have a camera and everything is just observation and sign. That's my favorite way. You know, I don't necessarily kill as big a bucks doing it that way all the time, but it's my favorite way to hunt because I feel like you're really in tune with your instincts, and then you can really use those woodsmanship skills. So I think that I would use a couple of good scouting days, maybe some windy days, some days where it rains real hard, and I would get in there and I would try to find some fresh sign. I would try to locate if it's been a hot year like it has around here, you know, water sources are going to be at a premium. Just the other day I was out scouting. I've been scouting like almost every day. I missed like 2 days in the last 6 or 7 days leading up to this Ohio opener, and I'll do the same up to the Michigan opener. I'm trying to zero in on a specific buck to go after. So I really beef up that scouting leading up to that early season hunt because I think that's one of my best chances, pretty much anyone's best chance at killing a good buck is those first couple days of the season. And I found this little water hole that I had no idea was there, and all the creek beds and everything are bone dry, and that water hole is just getting pounded. I mean, there are trails coming in from multiple directions, just beat down. There was a nice rub right next to it, and about 50 yards away, there were some scrapes. So what I would do is I'd wait for those good days, a real windy day or a rainy day, and I would get in there and I would try to find the sign. I would focus on, you know, those leeward sides of the ridge, you know, if you're in hill country, or those leeward points, those leeward bowls. You know, I would anticipate those are the areas that, you know, a certain buck will be bedded in. And then I'm going to look for sign kind of leading from those to, if it's dry, water or a food source. It could be crop fields up top, could be crop fields in the bottom. It could be an oak flat nearby. It just depends. But the reason I say I would wait for those real windy days or those real rainy days is because in hill country, you know, if you go on a dry, calm, crunchy day, you're not going to do much except just cause a lot of damage. So what I would do is I would try to get in one of those days and go and find that fresh sign. I mean, if you haven't done any pre-scouting and you don't know, that's what you have to do. You have to go in there and you have to use your woodsmanship skills and be very observant and try to find that sign, try to cut a track, try to find big scat, you know, like scat, like a Coke can size. You know, rubs are starting to pop up, scrapes are popping up. And I was just talking with my buddy Justin Wright about this the other day. It's not often you find a ton of scrapes this time of year in September, like mid-September, late September. But when you do, it's usually a buck. You know, it's usually not a 1.5-year-old buck that's his first year with a real rack. You know, usually a 2 or 3-year-old buck that's real aggressive, could be older bucks. You know, finding that kind of buck sign, good chance of buck. So you're gonna have to go and figure things out. But if you don't get those days, you don't get a rainy day or a real windy day, I would wait personally. I would wait and I would go in the day that I hunt, or I would poke around like way on the fringes and get up in there and try to scout try to find a distance and then make an educated guess. So that would be my advice. Joe's back.
Can you guys hear me? Am I staticky or am I solid?
That sounds better.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds a lot better than what it did before.
Okay, I'm outside with 5G. That's the only way that works.
One guy had a quick comment too. If you're able to mute when you're not talking and then go off mute when you talk, that might help reduce some of the static too.
Okay.
I think there was a couple other questions. Here's one from Rendell Eric, who's hunting Missouri recently. Hopping buck bedding, noticed that bucks are getting up an hour before dark, not moving to food, just staying within the bedding area, and then just bedding back down in their bedding areas before dark. Thoughts? I've seen that quite a bit, especially hunting like cattails marshes and things like that.
Yeah.
There's times where you hear the deer. You might be on an oak island. It's got a lot of feed trees on it. The acorns might even be falling. And 40, 50 yards off that island, there's a little brush pile, and that's where you've historically found beds. And maybe you can hear the deer get up and mill around, maybe hear a twig snap out there, and it's just dead up until dark. Or I've also had it where you can actually glass into that little side pocket of cover and be able to see antler tines moving around or see a buck moving around in there. And it's like right at the last legal minute of light, you can hear them start walking up toward the island. I think sometimes it just, you just don't have that much time, and you're kind of at their mercy in terms of how close you can get and when they're able to start moving.
Yeah, that's those situations where, you either have to be super stealthy and super patient on your approach, like you're sneaking up on, moving as slowly as possible and trying not to make any noise and get in there tight, or wait for some sort of condition, a little breezier day or a steady light rain, or use some sort of condition to get in there tight. But I've seen that too, those bedding areas where they just stay, on the beast, we used to call it like the staging area. They'd move within their bedding area. They might move a little bit away from their bed, but they're still in security cover. And, and that's the whole premise of like beast style hunting, right? It was like get in tight to those beds and get in where they feel comfortable. And a lot of times it's difficult, and you have to use the conditions to wait for that right condition to get in there tight. Oh, Joe, unmute yourself.
Sure, I'm an amateur here with my electronics. I've seen the same thing, and sometimes I think in some instances, what it is a buck will catch, if you get a wind swirl or something, and you can see the buck out there bedded or whatever it is, I think sometimes they'll catch a wind swirl, and that's where they'll hold up and get edgy. Because I can think of one buck I had where the first night he was real edgy, real weird, wouldn't move, just sat tight, and then the next night I was set up a little different, the wind was blowing different, and he came out completely relaxed. So I think sometimes those types of things happen, and we don't think of that either.
Yeah. This is a really good question. I'd be curious what you guys say on this. What ratio between the three of you do you spend time e-scouting, boot scouting, and hunting? Take that one, Garrett.
E-scouting, I probably do in some capacity, if not every day. I probably don't miss more than one day where I'm not at least looking at a map in some kind of capacity, whether I'm trying to figure out exactly where I want to sit on a given day, or if it's in the off season, I'm just e-scouting a new state or even an area to try and, look at different imagery or see what I might have missed. So that for me is pretty much all the time. And I like to bounce back and forth between the boots and the ground. Like before I go do a, March scouting trip, I'll e-scout really hard before I try and pick out the best route. And when I come back, I'm right back into e-scouting and trying to figure out how what I saw on the ground correlates to the big picture. And then maybe that helps guide me to where I want to walk next. So I'd say for me, it's definitely e-scouting the most, boots in the ground as much as I possibly can. And then hunting, if it's during the rut, I'd say I'm more focused on spending time with a bow in hand, in some kind of either a ground setup or a tree. Whereas early season, like there's times even in September where I'll keep bouncing if it's a marsh island to island or just looking for sign and not quite finding what I'm looking for, and then I'll just end up back at the truck. And that day just turned into a scouting trip,
Yeah. What about you, Joe?
For me, I would say I do mostly your typical type scouting, so I wouldn't even call it boots on the ground, because for me it's a lot of shining, a lot of running trail cams, stuff like that, which is, I guess, your typical scouting. But for me, I kind of work backwards. I find the buck I want to go after, regardless of what terrain he's in, and then once I find the buck I want to go after, that's where the e-scouting starts for me, and I'm looking at terrain, different features. Once I get a good idea of the terrains and the features, then it's more boots on the ground and then actual hunting. So for me, I would say your hunting and the e-scouting is comparable, but the boots on the ground and your typical getting out scouting, finding deer is number one.
Yeah. Yeah. I think mine varies too, like different stages of like the season. Like early and late, I would say like boots on the ground, observation. I would say roughly like 70% is that. E-scouting probably 15 and hunting probably 15. Like those when it's more of like a early season, like mid-October, and then you get into more like late season, it's more of like observe, scout, and then when I find what I'm looking for, then I dive in for like a really what I consider a higher percentage sit. But then like if it's during the rut, I still scout, but I'm out there more like actively like hunting more, I would say. I might scout and find an area, but a lot of times for me and during the rut, it's depending on where I'm sitting, it could be just depending on just time and stand, might determine my success. The more time I can get in stand in a good funnel, or, in a spot where I know bucks tend to work through during the rut, and you're just kind of like putting in your time, maybe where there's a couple of good bucks, or maybe the buck you're after, that he's rutting in there and you're just putting your time. That's what I had to do. Like, I shot a nice big mature 6 in Ohio a few years ago. And I just ended up, my strategy totally went from what I normally do. And I just planted myself in I made the decision, just plant myself in one spot, because that was the spot that I felt I had the best chance of getting him. And I was moving around so much, I just kept missing him. Like I'd move here and he'd come through over here, and I'd move over there and then I'd see him, a half mile that way, running a doe or something. And then I'd hunt over here and then there'd be a picture of him over here. So it was like, I kept missing him. And I was like, what, this is the spot where there's a big primary scrape here. He hits it, once every week or so. I said, I'm just going to plant myself here. And that's what I did. Every time I had a good wind, that's where I sat, and I ended up killing him like that. So it really depends. But my style is definitely more scouting, less hunting, and more of a high percentage, like stab at it when I feel confident. But it wasn't always that way. I used to be more of like a volume hunter for sure. But I think it's evolved more for me because of my time and my family and stuff like that. I can't be out there hunting, 75% of the season like I used to be. So I do little scouting missions and then try to make the best decision.
Yeah, and another good contextual thing there is, and I'm sure it varies a lot by the people watching in, but how close are you to the lands that you're hunting? Right? When I grew up in Wisconsin, there was a nice public marsh that was 15 minutes down the road, and I was out there all the time. And now the closest place to hunt is like 35, 38 minutes, depending on traffic, and it could be an hour and a half. And so there's days, especially as you get later in the season, where if I don't leave work by like 1 p.m., I'm not getting there until dusk. And that really, if I live closer, maybe someday I move closer to, places that I hunt. But that's a big difference in how much you can spend e-scouting versus boots in the ground too.
That's a good point, because I purposely hunt a lot around home. Even though around home is some of the most difficult hunting, and it's probably my least chance at like a big buck. But I do it because when I can't travel, it's like I want to be doing something hunting related. So I'll do a lot of scouting and just kind of keep tabs. I get in a kind of a rhythm at home. I was talked about it on a podcast recently, and like when I'm in the woods and I kind of feel like I can feel the changes happening, and I see the food sources, and I can follow where the deer are going, and I can keep tabs on like certain bucks and stuff and follow the sign. I feel like I'm more effective. But like if you take that away, and that was like an hour away, and I couldn't stay in that rhythm and kind of keep that information coming in, I wouldn't be nearly as effective. I would have to take a different approach there. So I purposely hunt around home, even though it's certainly like the quality is not there as much as some other areas, but you know, I still have fun with it and I still enjoy it.
Yeah. How about you, Joe? Do you tend to have places pretty close where you can hunt, or do you have to
Yeah.
travel quite a bit too?
No, that's a huge that's a huge benefit. I used to live 20 minutes from where I hunted, and the difference is substantial because now I can run out any night I want, go shotting, just check out what deer are in what spots at what times. I mean, I can shine at right after dark and see where they're coming out of, and then I can shine at 10 o'clock. Well, 10 o'clock's when it ends now. In the summer, you can shine at 10 o'clock and see what deer took a while to get out of the woodwork, so you know they might be in further or whatever it is. So yeah, that makes a huge difference. Or I can run out on a lunch break, for example. I get about an hour lunch break, so if I want to go pull a card, I can do that. It makes a huge difference. It really does.
Yeah, that's what I do too, Joe. I'm just kind of scratching and clawing for little scouting missions, whether it's at at lunchtime, pulling a card, lunchtime, like going and make a quick loop, through an area and looking for some sign that may not have been there a week later. Sometimes literally I'll just go in an area and it's just I just try to just bump deer out, because it might be, I wouldn't necessarily go into my best spot and do that, but if it's a spot that like I don't know what's going on and I want to know if a good buck is in there, or what the activity is like in there, I'll just make a loop through there and kind of mix it up and see what I see. And if I bump deer, it's not ideal, but now I can get that information. Okay. And it might put me in the game with something that I otherwise would have just, slipped right under my nose. I would have never even have known. So I use that approach a lot in areas that I don't have the information that I want. I don't run a ton of cameras. So, and I do feel like cameras miss a lot. So I'm not afraid to do that. I've multiple bucks. I have the whole reason I got in the game with them and ended up killing them was because I went in and I spooked them up and found out they were there. So that's a big approach, that I use too. It's just that scratching and clawing for those little scouting missions, and then eventually you get the information you want or the confidence you have to make a good high percentage sit.
It's probably a good segue too into this next question, which is kind of related. For somebody who doesn't run any trail cameras, which coincidentally is also kind of similar to the situation I run into Minnesota, where a lot of the WMAs and a lot of public lands, you can't leave cameras overnight, so you're just relying on the scouting and sign. The question goes on, when you're in season scouting at the edge of known buck bedding scouted from spring, and then now we're fast forwarding to September into early October, what is the exact specific sign saying set up right here?
So what did you say that was in season scouting, just like early season, or what did you?
Yeah, like if you know a buck is likely better in a certain area based on the scouting you did in the spring, and now you're going in to confirm, you're doing boots in the ground with the stand or saddle on your back, like what's saying here's the tree, or he's in this bedding area, or he's not in this bedding area, and I got to keep scouting.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's like the best possible scenario, right? Is like you pre-scouted a good bedding area, and you go and you check the fringe, you check the perimeter, safe distance, you're looking for hot signs. So, a good rub line coming out, a good active scrape right outside the bedding area, a big track that's coming out or going in, maybe there's a little creek crossing there or something you can check, or a water hole or some soft, whether it's like, marsh ground where you have some softer ground where tracks are easily picked up. Large scat, I always look for large scat. Sometimes too, like I found sometimes like around the food sources, I like to scout around the food sources that's like adjacent to where the bedding is that I've located in the spring, because I feel like that's a safe area to scout. You can usually pick up tracks better there. There's usually lots of scat there. A lot of times on the edge there's scrapes, and sometimes you can get a print in there. A lot of times, like either leading to it or along the perimeter, you'll see some other like rubs and stuff like that. But like a lot of times too, you'll find like these nighttime beds, where they're like in the food source or right next to the food source, and like a big mature bed, you see that and you know he's not bedded there like, during the day. Like that's a nighttime bed. He's up feeding, he lays down for a while, or maybe it's a little swale or something in the the standing cornfield or the bean field or whatever it is. And when I see those and it's a big bed, like a big mature buck bed, like a big bed, when you see it, that tells me that primary bedding area might be used. So that's the kind of stuff I look for. That would be, and that's like when we talk about like bed hunting for me personally, like I find a lot of buck beds like in the spring, but it doesn't mean I'm going to go hunt all of them. Like I scout around. I need a visual, an observation, like Joe, like a shining, an observation sit, and you can see them moving out in the marsh or in the CRP field or whatever. I need sign, or I need a picture, and if I don't have any of those and I don't have any clues that bed's being used at that time, I would never hunt it. I would never waste my time doing that, but I will waste my time going in and gathering that information. And there's some inherent risk there when you're going in there and diving in and trying to figure that out. That's why I try to find that information on the outskirts where it's a little more safer, where maybe they're a little more tolerant of human scent. But I'm not afraid to get in there and dive in there a little bit too. But I don't know. How do you guys feel about that?
I think you hit the nail on the head with your explanation for looking at it. The only thing I would add is, for guys traveling out of state, and this doesn't quite exactly hit on the question he was asking, but don't forget about networking if you're traveling out of state or going somewhere further. The internet, there's so many helpful people on Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Don't forget about the networking side of things. And then I guess the only other thing I would add that just pops into my mind because of a situation I'm dealing with is if you're in the hill country, your bigger woods, keep in mind, your beast basics that were kind of taught, or you think about the old beast hill country DVDs. And if you're hunting hills and ridges, make sure you're hunting the correct sides, the correct beds on the correct winds. It sounds so simple, but it's easy to think about a bed in hill country, go hunt it because the wind is favorable for you, but that buck's not laying up there because it's not favorable for him. Just the basics of the wind at the back, stuff like that. So keep those things in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And for me, especially like early season too, for whatever reason, it seems like if I can find an early season scrape, because they're not that common to find, and you find them in your bedding. Like sometimes you'll find those early season scrapes to get, worked or whatever on field edges. But it seems like I've had really good movement really close to those. And the stuff I've been hunting the last couple of weekends, early season here, is very similar to the stuff that Joe, you had hunted back when we did that Minnesota Public Land Challenge. And even just this last weekend, I popped into an island and checked one. It's like, maybe it's a week too late. Go check the next one. And finally found one where, I hadn't pre-scouted this island, so I was missing that piece of the puzzle. But even just like looking at the imagery, the UAV, we had, I think, just from this past May. So it's like only a couple months old imagery. And if you get springtime imagery in those cattail marshes, it's like, you can see everything. You can even tell if it's primarily an oak dominant island with a large canopy and not much understory, or it's really thick. So I could pretty much tell that it was, a big island that had oaks most likely on it. With and adjacent to it was a little like brushier, shrubbier island, probably 40 yards off, that had those trails going back and forth. That had kind of like hummocks or wiregrass adjacent to it. And so what I've been trying to do in those types of scenarios is, number one, get that fresh sign. And in this case, I did find 10 yards off that transition, there was a scrape. And it had been worked. I think I was just a couple of days too late, or they were just hanging back in that bedding area a little bit too long to see the movement. But getting up in that spot to where the wind and thermals are safe, but at the same time, also trying to pick a tree where I have some ability to glass over some of that open wiregrass or hummocks. In the case he's taking out one of those other trails, or I'm able to see one of those other islands that's 200-300 yards away, I'm sitting there with my binoculars and just scanning. Maybe I get a visual and say, I need to go over there tomorrow, Like, those are the two things I'm kind of trying to key on this time of year.
Yep. That's good stuff. Probably we got what time for one more, do you think, Garrett?
Yeah, I think so. We're about an hour. If we pick one more good question, I think we should be good.
This says, how do you guys see hunting pressure affect movement in bedding areas, like bucks having suppressed movement, changing feeding areas, or completely leaving the area. So again, like, these questions are great questions, but they're so situational. Like, one guy's hunting pressure, that he thinks is high is low to the other guy. You know what I mean? So it varies, even like state to state, even within that state. Like, I know Joe, he hunts an area in Wisconsin that has more pressure than some areas. And I hunt, the highest pressured area in Michigan, but you go to UP and it's like the pressure is not so high, so it really depends. Just in my area where I feel like I have I feel like I have a pretty good finger on the pulse here. We get pretty substantially high pressure, and the bucks, if the bedding areas, if those really secure bedding areas, if those aren't getting penetrated consistently and they're not getting bumped out of there, they tend to just get pushed back in there more, and then they just move later. And like we kind of explained earlier, that scenario where bucks will get up in their bedding area and they'll move within the bedding area, but they won't really exit it until dark. So that's what I see a lot. And that's why, when we talk about like bed hunting and beast hunting, it's like a lot of that stems from like high pressure or higher pressure hunting, where that's where you need to get on these bigger, older deer. And it's not like that everywhere. Like in some areas, that's not the play. It's, when pressure is lighter, you can get in more of a travel route scenario and get them killed. But, if the pressure is so high where those areas don't really exist, then those deer, they'll move out and they'll relocate. So a good example is where I hunt in northern Ohio. Very, very limited cover. I would say like 98% flat, open ag ground, and these little tiny woodlots, 2 acres, 5 acres. A 10-acre woodlot would be huge, and then there's these little tiny drainage ditches and stuff, but just no cover, man. And those little patches hold deer, and they will hold some decent bucks this time of year. But as soon as those combines and stuff start harvesting, and then the guys are out putting their ladder stand, they go into the woodlot, they bump the deer out, and they run 2 miles to the next woodlot. Within a week of bow season opener, these woodlots that had, good bucks in them or deer in them, they're completely void. They're completely pushed miles and miles to these metro parks that are, have no hunting. It might be 5 miles away, and all of these deer end up over there at some point, whether it's during bow season where a lot of them go, but as soon as that food starts coming out, there's just not enough depth in the security cover where the combine's going by and you got a little 2-acre woodlot. Like, the bucks don't feel safe, like hunkering down in there all of a sudden, and all this standing corn and these beans that were there and kind of insulating it, now it's gone. All of a sudden, this place doesn't feel safe. They can see in. I mean, they can see out, people can see in better, and they leave. So that's a perfect example where, like, a little bit of hunting pressure in those secure areas that feel secure a certain time of year, they get bumped out and they don't come back. So it just really depends. That's why places like swamps and marshes tend to get better. When you get like back further into those marshes, swamps, those islands, they tend to get better as the pressure increases around, because those are like the last secure spots, that just don't get messed with. But even those are starting to get messed with more now. So you really got to gauge the hunting pressure and really see. But if those areas are getting penetrated consistently, they're going to relocate. They're going to move. A lot of areas the pressure is so high, the deer just get pinballed around. And that's what I see a lot here. They just get pinballed around because there's nowhere really. There's certainly some spots, but it's not super common to have a spot where nobody goes ever. It's just there's too many roads, there's too high population, there's just too many hunters. So, what do you guys?
Joe?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, because our season just started this past Saturday, and we could really see the pressure start to hit on Friday. People started going into the woods, preparing their spots for the next morning. You could see all the cars parked in the spots. And it was interesting because my cameras, I was watching 3 different deer, and I was watching them on my I've been running a fair amount of wireless cameras, and I've been watching them. And on Friday, you could see the shift already. Things changed that night. And then on Saturday, all these spots that were holding deer completely changed. And I also had cameras set up in spots, so swamps, like Andy said. I've got cameras set up in swamps, and suddenly, just like that, they started getting hot in those swamps, just from the pressure of opening day. Another, I guess, interesting story. So Andy mentioned a lot of deer will move off into parks. We've got a refuge over here. It's not a park, but it's a place you can't hunt, a wooded place you can't hunt. And a lot of people know all the deer go in there when the pressure is on. And middle of the day on Saturday, which is our opener, they had a new buck move into there, and the people that work there told me about it. And it's just kind of crazy because these deer could figure it out opening day from the headlights in the morning, the car door slamming, the smell swirling in the air. This buck knew opening day that was the first time they'd seen him in there middle of the day. So you have to figure out where those spots are. It takes kind of years and years because, I mean, I've banged my head up against the wall so many times. You watch a deer all summer, it disappears, and then you have to figure out where's his hiding spot. And I found those hiding spots miles away. I found those hiding spots super close. It's one of those things you have to learn over time, where those spots are that they go to, and then anticipate your deer that you're watching all summer moving away and potentially into those spots. And if they're not in those spots, it's where you got to put your boots on the ground and find them. And if they're not there, I mean, they could have traveled a long way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just about every place that you can describe has its own unique sets of challenges. And, some of the stuff that I hunt in either northern Wisconsin or even some of the stuff locally in the bigger cattail marshes, it's almost the opposite, where you've got so much land. And even if it gets a lot of hunting pressure, hunter per square foot or square mile ratio, and, where the parking lots are, there's a lot of ground that never gets a footstep on it, just because it's, hard to access, or there's just a large volume of land. And a lot of it has really good security cover. And so you look at the options that deer would have to bed and hide and be relatively undisturbed, and it's a really, really high list. And it seems like in areas like that, I think I find that a lot of deer will not necessarily need to move far, because it doesn't take much for them to be able to just sit back in the same spot and not get harassed, because the security cover is good enough for a large enough area. But you get into shotgun season or whatever, and then you've got 20 vehicles, a parking lot, all coming off in the same directions. That definitely starts to funnel the deer movement. Of course, then you get some of those deer that just hunker down, and you might have that little undisturbed pocket where nobody walks exactly where he's at, and it might be open cattails, but it's dry enough to be able to hold him, and he's just sitting there. There's no brush around, and you just happen to randomly bump him one day, and it's like, how would you know that to even look there? So there's definitely those types of instances too. But I tend to see, in those bigger areas, a lot of times they will have, I think, more of a tendency to stay put if they are able to, just by the depth of the cover.
Yep, that's good stuff.
And one thing I'll add too, I always harp on this, every deer's personality is different. And one thing Johnny Stewart said on a Spartan Forage podcast that kind of hit me is some of these deer are used to living among the people. And I'm seeing that with the buck right now that I've been chasing for the past few days. And I've bumped him a few times, and he just keeps going right back into the spot, wind depending. And it's a spot where it gets a lot of squirrel hunters. He's just used to being bumped. He's been bumped his whole life. He knows how to loop people, and he tolerates it. And if you look at his bed without seeing his exact bed, he doesn't have any rubs around, anything like that. That would make it obvious. So sometimes like you said, Garrett, you get them right under your nose, and you got to find those spots.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, well, great discussion. We're probably going to close it off here. Thanks, everybody, for sending in the questions that you did have. Go check out Spartan Forge. And what we're probably going to do here is I'll try and save this video that we did, and we'll try and upload it to the Spartan Forge YouTube page, so that if you guys want to come back and watch this at a later date, or if anybody wasn't able to join, hopefully we can, get that live.
All right, sounds good. It was fun, guys. Good luck out there.
Good luck. Good luck to everyone. Talk to you later.
See ya.
See ya.